We can see how the breath of Romanism hovers over the paintings of the nationally minded Lebrun, Murillo, and Reni, and how in Rubens, Van Dyck, and especially Rembrandt, the opposition to Romanism comes to such clear expression in their paintings of faces, not of Jesus alone but also of other biblical characters. So we see how all the spiritual activities of man gradually take form among the various impulses that make themselves felt in human evolution. Similarly, you would find that in the times when painting and representative art have given place to the word, for since the 16th century the word has had the same significance in such matters as pictorial representation had in earlier times, you will find that the figure of Jesus, of the Christ, is again continually changing. It is never fixed and constant, but is always conceived according to how the various forces flow together in writers. Standing there before us as the latest products, let us say, we have the Jesus of Rena, the Jesus of Strauss, who is no Jesus, and the Christ of Soloviev. These are the latest products, and how vastly different they are. The Jesus of Rena is entirely a Jesus who, as a man, lives in the land of Palestine as a human historical figure. Palestine itself is marvelously depicted. With the aid of the best of modern scholarship, it is described in such a way that one has before one the complete Palestinian landscape with its people. Wandering about this realistically rendered landscape and among its people is the figure of Jesus. The attempt is made to explain this Jesus figure on the basis of this landscape and its inhabitants, to explain how he grows up and becomes a man, and to explain how it was possible for such a man to arise in this land. The outstanding character of Rena's description will only be revealed when we compare it with earlier accounts and representations. These take the inner course of the events described in the Gospels and place them in a landscape that is really nowhere in particular. The facts as they are described in the Gospels are simply related over and over again, and the landscape in which they occurred is totally disregarded. It is depicted in such a way that it might be anywhere. Rena, however, goes to work to portray the Holy Land in a realistic, detailed way so that Jesus becomes a true Palestinian in this Holy Land. Christ Jesus, who should belong to all of mankind, becomes a Jesus who lives and walks in Palestine as an historical figure who is to be understood in relation to the Palestine of the years 1 to 33 AD, that is, understood from the customs, views, opinions and landscape of the country, a right proper, realistic description. For once, Jesus was to be shown as an historical person and was to be described as any other in history. For Rena, it would have been meaningless to portray an abstract Socrates who might have lived anywhere, anytime, and it would have been equally meaningless for him to portray an abstract Jesus who might have lived anywhere on earth. In complete accord with the science of the 19th century, he sets out to depict Jesus as an historical figure living between the years 1 and 33 AD, and made absolutely comprehensible by the conditions prevailing in Palestine at that time. Jesus lived from the year 1 to 33 AD. He died in 33 AD, just as any other man might have died in this or that year. If he continues to work in the world, it is in the same way any other dead person might have continued to work. Fitted completely into the modern point of view, Jesus was an historical personality accounted for by the milieu in which he lived. That is what Ernest Renan gives us in his Life of Jesus. Now let us turn to the life of Jesus that is in reality no Life of Jesus by David Friedrich Strauss. I have said it is no Life of Jesus. Strauss also works as a highly cultured and learned man. When he sets out to investigate anything, he does so with thoroughness akin to that of Renan in his domain. Strauss, however, does not turn his attention to the historical Jesus. He is, for him, only the figure to which he attaches something quite different. Thus, Strauss investigates all that was said of Jesus insofar as he was the Christ. He examines what is said about his miraculous entry into the world, his wonderful and miraculous development, his expression of great and special teachings, and how he undergoes suffering, death, and resurrection. These are the accounts in the Gospels that Strauss selects for investigation. Naturally, Renan, too, used the Gospels, but he reduced them to what he, from his detailed and exact knowledge of Palestine, could conceive of the life of Jesus. This approach has no interest at all for Strauss. He tells himself that the Gospels relate this or that concerning Christ, who lived in Jesus. Then he sets out to investigate the extent to which what is related of the Christ has also been living as myth in other parts of the world, for instance, how the story that is told of a miraculous birth and the development of Jesus Christ is to be found in various other folk myths, as is also the mystery of Golgotha, which is referred now the one God and then to another. Thus, Strauss sees in the figure of the historical Jesus only the opportunity for concentrating the myth-forming activity of mankind into one personality. Jesus does not concern him at all. The only value he has for Strauss is that the myths, which are distributed all over the world, are concentrated in this single man Jesus. They are all hung on him, as it were. These myths, however, all spring from a common impulse. All of them bear witness to the myth-forming power that lives in mankind. Where does this myth-forming power arise? As Strauss sees it, in the course of mankind's earthly development, from the times of the first beginnings of the earth to its final end, mankind has and always will have a higher power in it than the merely external power that develops on the physical plane. A power runs right through mankind that will forever address itself to the super-earthly. This super-earthly finds expression in myths. We know that man bears something supersensible within him that seeks to find expression in myths since it cannot be expressed in external physical science. Thus, Strauss does not see Jesus in the single individual, but rather the Christ in all men, the Christ who has lived in and through all men since their beginning, and who has brought it about that myths are told of him. In the case of Jesus, it is only that his personality gives occasion for the myth-forming power to develop with extreme force and strength. In him it is concentrated. Strauss, therefore, speaks of a Jesus that is in reality no Jesus, but he fastens upon him the spiritual Christ force that lives in all humanity. For Strauss, mankind itself is the Christ, and he works always before and after Jesus. The true incarnation of the Christ is not the single Jesus, but the whole of humanity. Jesus is only the supreme representative for the representation of the Christ in mankind. The main thing in all this is not Jesus as an historical figure, but an abstract mankind. Christ has become an idea, which incarnates in and through all mankind. That is the kind of highly distilled thought that a man of the 19th century is able to conceive. The element of life in the idea has become the Christ. He is conceived entirely as an idea and Jesus is passed by. This is a life of Jesus that is no more than a record of the fact that the idea, the divine, incarnates continually in all humanity. Christ is diluted down to an idea, is thought of merely as an idea. So much for the second life of Jesus, the life of Jesus by David Friedrich Strauss. So we have Ernest Renan's Life of Jesus, which sets forth the historical figure of Jesus amidst the individuals around him as well as by himself. Then we have in Strauss's book the idea of Christ, which runs through all mankind. In this highly distilled form, however, it remains a mere abstraction. When we come to Soloviev, behold, Jesus is no more, but only the Christ. Nevertheless, it is the Christ conceived as living, not working in men as an idea, with the consequence that its power is transformed in him into a myth, but rather working as a living being who has no body, is always and ever present among men, and is, in effect, positively responsible for the external organization of human life, the founder of the social order. Christ, who is forever present, a living being who would never have needed a Jesus in order to come among men. Naturally, you will not find this so radically expressed in Soloviev, but that is of no account. It is the Christ as such who stands always in the foreground, the Christ, moreover, as the living one who can only be comprehended in imagination, but by this means can be truly understood as a real and actual supersensible being working on earth. There you have the three figures. The same being meets us in the 19th century in a threefold description. The Life of Jesus by Ernest Renan, completely realistic. Realistic history of Fortiori. Jesus as an historical figure, a book that is written with all the learning of the 19th century. Then came David Friedrich Strauss with this idea of mankind, working on, running through all mankind, but remaining an idea, never awakening to life. Lastly, Solovey's Christ, living power, living wisdom, altogether spiritual. A realistic life of Jesus by Renan, an idealistic life of Jesus by Strauss that is also an idealistic presentation of the Christ impulse, a spiritual presentation of the Christ impulse by Solovey. Today, I want to place before you, side by side as three expressions of modern life, these three ways of cognizing the figure of Jesus Christ. Tomorrow we shall see how they take their place among the various impulses that we have recognized as working in mankind.